Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the White River State of the River this evening. We appreciate your being here with us for what is unfortunately another year of virtual State of the River meetings. I will say that we're happy to have you here. We're happy to have this forum online, but we're really looking forward to getting back to some in-person meetings out there in the different basins throughout the Colorado River District and meeting in person with all of you. We will have some in-person outreach events this summer and fall. Keep an eye out on our email list and our website for opportunities to engage with us when we're in your communities. And we'll do our best to do as much outreach to you all as possible. Really appreciate, again, your being here. Looking forward to a good program tonight. A few housekeeping items before I dive in to a brief overview of who the River District is. First, questions are going to be answered at the end of this evening's event. You can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. Feel free to ask questions throughout the program. You can direct those at individual panelists or just general questions, and we'll all do our best to get together and answer those questions for you. If we're not able to answer questions tonight, we will provide email addresses for our staff and our presenters in the chat box at the bottom of your screen at the end of the event so that you can communicate with us and all the folks who make this event possible. We'll also provide links to further information on the topics we discussed this evening in that chat box. So keep an eye on that, and we'll be putting out links so that you can do your own homework as well. So first, let me start off and give a little bit of an overview of who the River District is. The Colorado River Water Conservation District was created in 1937 to lead in the protection, conservation, use, and development of the water resources of the Colorado River Basin. We span 15 counties from the Continental Divide to the Utah border, and from the Wyoming border to the north slope of the San Juans. That's the principal tributaries of the Colorado, including the Gunnison, the Yampa, a portion of the Green and Dolores, the White, of course, and then the main stem of the Colorado. This area produces, more than 80% of the state's water, but has about 10% of the state's population. And so we have our job cut out for us when it comes to representing and protecting the water interests of the men and women who live in this region and who use this water on a daily basis. Next slide, please. Zooming out from that district, you can see the Colorado River Basin as a whole. Here in the upper basin states, you can see that the River District and our sister agency, the Southwestern Water Conservation District in the Four Corners region, those really are kind of the heart and soul of the water producing areas of the entire upper Colorado River Basin. The territory within the River District, our 15 counties, produces somewhere near 65% of the Colorado River's natural flow at Lee Ferry. When you add in Southwestern, that area, the entire Colorado Western slope produces somewhere near 75% of the river's natural flow. So we are certainly blessed with an abundance of water in most years here, but we also carry a significant burden when it comes to producing the water that 40 million people downstream rely on for municipal, industrial, agricultural, recreational, and environmental needs. Next slide, please. We do a lot of work at the district, and from our technical side to our legal and advocacy side, I work on our government relations and our communications and external affairs teams, but we as a team work every day to keep water flowing to farms and ranches. We work with agricultural producers throughout the district on a regular basis. We work to maintain healthy rivers, especially in hot and dry temperatures, or hot and dry conditions like we're dealing with right now, when we have hot water temperatures that threaten the viability and the health of our fisheries and our aquatic organisms and just the entire ecosystem that evolves around the rivers. Our attorneys work daily to secure legal protections to protect West Slope water and keep that water on the western slope. We are often at the table and in the courtroom with front range diverters and folks that would seek to diminish our supplies of water on the western slope. And then lastly, I think all of the three things I mentioned before tie to ensuring adequate drinking water supplies. We have a number of growing municipalities and communities on the western slope that rely on snowpack and water availability for their municipal needs. So that's just a quick overview of who we are and what we do. Next slide, please. Oh, and this one's blank. So that is a quick overview of who we are and what we do. I'm pleased now to kick it over to one of my newer colleagues at the River District, Amy Moyer. Amy serves as the Director of Strategic Partnerships at the district, where she oversees the district's new community funding program, which was created following the passage of ballot measure 7A last November by voters within the district's boundaries. Amy's only been with the district since March of 2021. So this is her first round of State of the Rivers meetings on the western slope. So with that in mind, I hope you won't be too hard on her with your questions, and I hope you'll join me in welcoming her here this evening. Thanks for being with us, Amy. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Zane. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining the White River State of the River. Again, my name is Amy Moyer. I am the Director of Strategic Partnerships with the Colorado River District, and I am looking forward to kicking off our program to talk about our community funding partnership. And for those of you that have followed our funding program closely, you'll know that we had previously named this program the Partnership Project Funding Program. It is now the Community Funding Partnership. And the reason for that is we want to be part of our communities at the River District. We want to be partners on your projects. We want to help our West Slope communities adapt and thrive. But to start with just a brief history of our funding program, many of you might remember that this funding program started at the ballot box with the passage of ballot question 7A in November of 2020. We want to again thank our West Slope voters for supporting water, and particularly water on the West Slope. The importance of this program is to move the River District mission and strategic plan forward, like Zane just talked through. We want to keep and protect our water on the West Slope. We want to use it wisely. We want our communities to adapt to a drier future. And so with the passage of ballot question 7A, the River District, through our community funding partnership, has about $4.2 million annually to dedicate to high impact water projects across our district. And so far, again, our funding program started this year. We funded 8 projects, as you can see on this project map. You can also find this project map on the River District website. You can see brief descriptions of each project. We're looking forward to continuing to populate this map, continuing to support additional projects, of course, in the White River Basin. But these projects represent a diverse set of water needs, from dam rehabilitation to river restoration to diversion structure upgrades, ditch piping, headgate replacements, post-fire water quality monitoring, integrated water supply management planning. And what that means and what that translates to is additional storage on the West Slope, more efficient delivery systems, healthier rivers, more resilient watersheds. And so we are excited to support these projects. We are looking forward to seeing these move towards construction. Again, these projects are multi-purpose and multi-benefit. They are leveraging additional dollars. They have multiple partners. And again, we're thrilled to be a partner on the West Slope in new ways and provide financial support to our West Slope water projects. I want to go over quickly just some of our program basics. So projects are eligible within the River District's 15-county region. And we also have a wide array of project proponents that are eligible for our funding that are listed on this slide. But what we're looking for is we're looking to strategically provide investments, both large and small, in the water world. So from our smaller ditch companies to our towns to our conservancy districts. And we're looking for projects with strong local support. And so a feature of our community funding partnership is that we do require a letter of support from the relevant Board of County Commissioners for each water project. And the reason for that is we want to work in conjunction with our local elected officials. We want to continue to have these conversations about the importance of water, and again, worked hand in hand with our counties and local governments on the West Slope. Our intent with this funding is to be a catalyst to leverage additional dollars on the West Slope. And so another unique feature of our funding program is that we don't have a set matching requirement for each project. We do that because we know each community is different, each project proponent is different, each project is different. But it's important to remember that the River District will never be the sole source of funding for any project, and we always expect project proponents to bring some cash to the table. But again, it's our intent to leverage these dollars, identify other funding partners, whether that's public, private, philanthropic, federal dollars, again, to make these our $4.2 million go farther and to use these public funds wisely. We are currently funding projects across 5 project categories that you can see here. So productive agriculture, conservation and efficiency, healthy rivers, watershed health and water quality, and infrastructure. And I'll pause here to make a plug. I'll mention it a few times during my presentation to visit the River District website. You can find more information on our funding program. We have a webinar that was solely dedicated to this funding program because we have a lot of great speakers slated for tonight. So I will just hit some of the high points here. But I do want to emphasize again, we're seeking projects that are multi-purpose, multi-benefit, projects that are most competitive for our funding, can demonstrate how the project objectives can span many of these categories. And I also want to note that we can also fund different phases of a project. So we can fund some of the design and feasibility work that lead to the construction. We know there are a lot of stimulus dollars conversation, and it's a necessary gap, I think, in funding programs to be able to fund the necessary design and feasibility work that can lead to getting a project on the ground. And I do also want to mention that we are not at this point reimbursing for completed projects. And again, the reason for that is we want to be a partner early on in these water projects. We want to work with you all on the West Slope to help develop and again, be a catalyst for developing a multi-purpose, multi-benefit project and seeking additional funding to leverage our funding program dollars. We also have important equity principles built out throughout our funding program, and that's both to distribute our funding equitably across our geography, so across our 15 counties, across our different communities, and then equitably across our categories that I just mentioned. So we want to fund from the town of Rangeley to the town of Meeker, to our ranchers, to our recreators, to support our endangered fish, all pieces that you'll hear about tonight. So we are tracking the projects that we're funding by county, by basin, by category, with a hope that we can align with our equity principles, tracking on a 5-year rolling average basis. So in terms of the application process, we first recommend that folks contact us for a pre-application meeting. And during that time, we can walk you through our application process. We can learn more about your specific project. We can suggest additional partners to reach out to. We can recommend ideas to make your project, again, multi-purpose, multi-benefit, and ultimately more competitive for both our funding, but other funding sources. We can recommend those other funding opportunities or funding partners, and we can also provide any guidance that we may have on the permitting process or how to achieve other project milestones. We are also operating on a rolling application deadline, which again is, I think, a unique feature for a funding program. And the reason for that is we know our projects operate on different timelines, our communities have different needs, and we want to be able to, again, be a catalyst for aligning with other funding opportunities that may only have 1 or 2 deadlines a year. And at this point, our approval pathways, there are 2. So funding requests under $50,000 can typically be approved by the River District General Manager, and our larger funding requests go before the Colorado River District Board of Directors that meets quarterly in January, April, July, and October. But again, these pre-application meetings, we can talk about these timelines, we can talk about this application process and work with you through all of that. So to wrap up and get to our other speakers, what to do next, if you're interested in more information on our funding program, if you have a project that's looking for financial support, the first step is, again, to go to our coloradoriverdistrict.org website. You can find our community funding partnership webpage and review our guidance materials, our application materials. And then second, reach out to us at partnerfunding@crwcd.org. We'll set up that pre-application conversation. And then finally, we'll walk you through submitting an application and the supporting materials to be considered for funding. And again, outside of these three steps, if you want to contact me and talk about a project, just talk a little bit more about our funding program, please feel free to reach out. Again, I'm Amy Moyer. I think my email will be listed at the end of this presentation. I am happy to talk. And with that, Zane, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Amy, for that excellent overview. I really appreciate that. And yeah, glad to get this information out to the communities we serve. And hopefully we'll see no shortage of applications for projects coming from the White River Basin. Our next guest this evening is going to give us a good overview of the hydrology in the White River Basin and across the Western Slope. Dr. Becky Bollinger has been a climatologist and drought specialist with the Colorado Climate Center since 2016. As assistant state climatologist, Becky monitors Colorado climate, communicates climate information to the public, and gives historical perspective to weather events. Becky's area of expertise includes climate variability, seasonal climate prediction, drought monitoring, and climate and hydrological cycle of Colorado and climate communication and services for Coloradoans. Glad to have Becky here with us tonight. Welcome, Dr. Bollinger. Look forward to your presentation, and hopefully it won't be too sobering.
Thank you, Zane, for the introduction. I apologize ahead of time for the overwhelming lack of good news that will be in my presentation. But without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started with it. So I will start with how things started, how they're going right now, and then where they're headed for the region. This is a look back at what happened May through October of last year that really set the stage for the drought that we're in now. So SPEI is a standardized precipitation evapotranspiration index, but what it really does is it just takes your temperature and precipitation and blends them together in an anomaly of how hot and dry or cooler, wetter conditions are. So where you see those reds and maroons, we are looking at extreme dryness combined with heat anomalies. And for that period up to October last year, you could see that across the entire Western Slope, including the White River Basin. What this did was detrimental to the soil moisture. So this is a product that comes from the Colorado Basin River Forecast Center, where they show the inches needed to saturate the soils. And this was a snapshot taken mid-November. So this is really when you're locking in that soil moisture. And that's a number that you're going to need to remember as you go into the next spring and everything starts to thaw. Because if you have a deficit in the soils, that will be the first bucket that needs to be filled when the snow starts to melt. So even if you have normal snowpack, if more of it's going to the soils, you have less available to run off and be available for water supply. And this is a super fancy schematic that I like to show with that basically you have the snow water equivalent or snowpack in the mountains, and in the top panel where you have a soil bucket that's filled with lots of moisture, then in the spring when things melt, less of that snowpack has to go to the soil bucket and more of it gets to run off and go out elsewhere. And then in the bottom panel, where we were at the beginning of the cold season last year in November 2020, there was a deficit in the soil bucket. And so more of the snowpack goes to that and less of it is available after for runoff and water supply. So we already knew that in order to make up that deficit, you need to get above average snowpack to have what we would consider a normal year. So this is looking at the sites that make up the White River Basin snow-tell sites. There are 3 sites that feed into the White River watershed. The colored shading shows the historical range of how snowpack builds up over time. So we start with October 1st, and then snowpack begins to accumulate towards a peak in mid-April, and then begins to melt out and is usually melted out by July. The black line shows what happened this year, and you can compare that to that green line, which is the average. So the black line you could see was near average in November, but then struggled and couldn't quite get to average. And then it also peaked too early and too low. Now, a lot of times we want to tend to focus on that accumulating line as it goes up, and then that little peak value, and where that's what we expect to be the most important things. But really, it's this entire area under the curve. So not only is it important how you're building the snowpack, when it peaks and how high it peaks, but also how fast it melts and how early it melts. So generally, if you're peaking earlier and melting earlier, if you melt too fast, all of those are going to combine to be less efficient of a system, and you're not going to get as much runoff or water supply as you would want to from that snowpack. So let's recall how it started with that 6-month SPEI that ended in October. And we're going to tack on what happened over the most recent 6 months, so from November through May, or maybe it was December through May. I can't count to 6 right now. Sorry about that. Anyway, you can see obviously things really changed for areas east of the Continental Divide. And if you look west of the Continental Divide, it really doesn't look as bad as it did from that previous 6 months that ended in October 2020. But it's not great. And it wouldn't be so bad if we had that on top of a near normal or a wet period, but we had it on top of an extremely dry period. And so it's not going to help you at all get out of a drought situation. In fact, it means you pretty much stay in that current extreme drought situation that you're in. So there was near record dryness basically for the last 12 months if we focus on Rio Blanco County. This is looking at all June through May periods back to 1895. And this one really shows up as the 3rd driest behind 1977. And I think that's 1964, looks like. I also wanted to look at, well, what about the last 24 months? And that one even beats out that 1977 record for almost second driest, looks like 24-month period on record. And you can see if you look at the recent past that there are a lot of times that Rio Blanco County has been below average for 24-month time periods. So how does this translate to the water supply? Well, this is a snapshot of the latest water supply forecasts from the Colorado Basin River Forecast Center. Not so much of a forecast anymore because most of the runoff has actually already occurred. But if you look at that one triangle that says WRM, that is the White River near Meeker, which had a 30 to 50% of average forecast for total volume flow through that area. And this is what happens when you click on that site to see what happens. So a couple looks at the lines that we're looking at here. Current is where we're at, which is about, I think, like 79,000 acre feet have gone through since the beginning of April on the White River near Meeker. And that's just below the total seasonal record low, which happened in 1977. And then that plume with the pink rectangles shows what the forecast has been from the Colorado Basin River Forecast Center. So they expect that we will get just a little bit more, which will put us above the record low, but not really in a good situation. You can see how far below that is from the average median lines. So a quick look at the hydrology in the White River Basin. These are all from waterwatch.usgs.gov, and the top one shows how you would typically expect the stream flow to go through White River near Meeker, and the black line shows what it's done this year. On the right side is that total cumulative flow, and you can see the black line just barely clearing above that 1977 record low cumulative flow, but still well below the average. And then all throughout Northwest Colorado, you can see in that bottom map just dark red dots and bright red dots showing where flows are very low throughout the region. So where do we go from here? Well, very short-term outlook, we see some spotty precipitation activity, which is below average. Not really a big surprise for summertime. We don't expect, really widespread precipitation this time of year. And if we look out through the end of June, we can expect to see the pattern continue of what we've been seeing with increased likelihood of warmer than average temperatures and drier than average conditions. This is looking at the long-term outlook from the Climate Prediction Center, which covers the period of June, July, August. And again, we're looking at temperature on the left and precipitation on the right. And you can see that for the entire region and surrounding areas, we have that increased likelihood of warmer than average and drier than average conditions. So if we look at the seasonal rainfall pattern at Meeker, this is the monthly average precipitation that falls at Meeker. And we can see that June and July is generally a little bit of a drier period. So from June, July, August, we only get about 3.5 inches of moisture over the area. So we really can't expect to bust a drought during this dry season anyway. But if we could get average precip, it would certainly help. And if we got some solid fall precipitation where you see an uptick in September and October, that would really provide some relief too. Now, this is what has fallen from August through October in Rio Blanco County since the turn of the century. And you can see with that thick black line being the average, there are many times that we get drier than average, but it is possible that when you get above average, like you can see in the years 2013 and 2014, that would definitely provide some solid drought relief. So unfortunately, the key points are that our hot and dry summer transitioned to fall that way last year, dried out the soils, and we added on a poor snowpack accumulation to that, which peaked early and peaked too low. And these all resulted in lower water supplies for the basin. And unfortunately, that dry pattern does look to continue with a hot and dry summer more likely, which means drought relief is not going to be expected anytime soon. But if we do get some late summer precipitation and an early start to a wet fall, more cool and more snow, that would definitely help recharge the soils. And a strong snowpack season next year would really get us out of this. So that's what I'm keeping my fingers crossed for, and that is all I have. Sorry for going over just a little bit.
No, you're fine. Thank you, Becky. Really appreciate that information. I think it's valuable, and it's important for us all to know what we're working with in the remainder of the water year that we're currently in. So thank you again. I am going to go ahead and introduce our next presenter. Again, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box. We will hopefully have time at the end of the program for our presenters to all come together and answer some of these questions for you. But our next presenter is Aaron Light. Aaron has been with the Division of Water Resources for 20 years. I apologize, I've got a 9-month-old crying in the background. The pleasures of Zoom and working from home, but thanks for bearing with me. Aaron's been with the division for 20 years and has been the division engineer in Division 6 for almost 15 years. I do want to note how much we appreciate the productive working relationship that we have between the River District and the Division of Water Resources, whether it be with the state engineer down at the Capitol. I testify alongside Kevin and some of those folks in his office on the regular, or working in the field with our division engineers and their water commissioners and all of the folks in between that help us make sure that water is administered appropriately, and that they're helping us protect and conserve our water resources on the Western Slope. So thank you, Aaron, for being here this evening. Look forward to your presentation.
All right. Thank you, Zane. What I'd like to present today, I'm just going to touch on a couple topics. I'm going to give you an update on the measuring devices, talk about the 2020 abandonment process, where we are, and then I'm just going to show a couple slides on how you can go onto our website and look at what river calls we have here in all of Division 6, which we actually do have quite a few more river calls than we normally do. So I'll show those. So starting with an update on measuring devices, just to give everybody kind of a reminder, I'm sure many of you know this, but some may not. Back in September of 2019, I issued several hundred orders for measuring devices in the Yampa River and the North Platte River basins. And then later in March of 2020, I sent out notices for, not orders, but notices for measuring devices, for the installation of measuring devices, again, on many structures in the White River Basin and the Green River Basin. So I wanted to give you an update of where we are. This first slide takes a look at where we were in January 2020 as to trying to get as many structures equipped with measuring devices as we possibly could. So when you look at this photo here, you're looking at something that I refer to as active with records. It goes without saying we have thousands and thousands of water rights and structures, but we don't necessarily keep records on all of them. They may be active, but we don't keep records on them. For example, a spring or a very small pond that might just be used for stock watering. We wouldn't keep records on that. But we do keep records on ditches, pumps, pipelines, and then bigger reservoirs too, but those aren't included here. We're just referring to those direct flow diversions out of our streams and rivers that we keep records on and wanted to have measuring devices installed. So focusing just on the White River, back in January 2020, our count was that we had 720 active structures that we kept records on. Of those 720, there were 124 with measuring devices and almost 600 without measuring devices. So we were about 83% shy of where we're not shy, but 83% were not in compliance with our statutes that do require measuring devices. Fast forwarding here to April. April's the last time I updated this map. When we fast forward here, you see that the numbers have actually gone down. Active with record has gone down to 691. Why is that? And actually, if you look at even the totals for all of Division 6, has gone down much further. Through this process, we're trying to go back and reevaluate, well, what structures do we really need to be trying to maintain records on? We have a very small staff, and we're stretched very thin. And so we've been having to ask ourselves, if whether or not there's structures we don't need to be maintaining records on, and then in turn don't need measuring devices. So that's why that number's gone down from 720 to 691. You can also see, though, that we actually have had some success from those notices I sent out, where we've gone from having 124 structures with measuring devices, and that's increased to 218. So I've been very pleased that people have actually voluntarily, as a result of that notice, installed these measuring devices. And when I say voluntarily, without me having to issue orders. So now we're at 68% that don't have measuring devices. But again, I feel good. We've made some progress. So where we sit with this in the White River Basin, for those who maybe received a notice from me about the installation of measuring devices, that notice indicated that I would follow up from that notice with orders for those that did not install measuring devices. And I had hoped to, after some communication and work with folks in the basin, to actually send those orders out this spring and early summer. That, however, is not going to happen. I've been working with Director Kevin Ryan with Division of Water Resources on how we're going to move forward with measuring devices in all of Division 6 for that matter. But primarily here with the White River, we're going to hold off on issuing orders because he's at a point that right when he can start holding some public meetings, he wants to move forward with the measuring rules for the Colorado River Basin. And though I will note that these measuring rules are intended to be developed statewide, but of course the thing that's really prompting them is Colorado Compact Administration. So we have decided that we will hold off on those measuring device, the order for the measuring devices, until he has an opportunity to do some work on those measurement rules. So in the end, whether it's measurement rules or orders, we still, people are still going to have to get their measuring devices installed. And included with that too is operable head gates. We certainly need operable head gates as well. But this is just looking at measuring devices. So with that, let's look at the 2020 abandonment. For anybody that's familiar with my original list that came out in July of 2020, there were 703 water rights on that list, either in whole or in part. Making up that 703 was 196 pre-compact alternate points of diversion and 75 post-compact alternate points of diversion. All of those are considered a part, abandonment of water rights in part. We consider the alternate points to be a component of the water right, just like a different use, like you might have irrigation and domestic decreed to a ditch. We could abandon either irrigation or domestic or both. So this is similar. Alternate points is just similar to that. It's just a component of those rights. And I'll talk a little bit about those pre-compact rights a little bit more on my next slide and what we're doing with those. Then if we just look at the remaining rights, subtracting the alternate points, there were 289 rights that were on the list that were in the Yampa White Green in those basins combined. And then 143 rights in the North Platte River Basin. And I'll maybe explain a little bit why that's been reduced to 95. So there's no longer 143 in the North Platte River Basin. To just kind of pull out the White River Basin, there were 63 water rights, and that's of the 289, because there were some pre-compact alternate points on the list, but just of the 289, 63 were in the White River Basin. So not a substantial amount compared to some of my other areas in the state. So right now we're nearing our deadline for the filing of statements of objection, and that deadline is July 1st, 2021. I'll just tell you right now that I completed my presentation and forwarded it off to the River District about 24 hours ago, and I can tell you the objections have gone up quite a bit since even yesterday at 127 objections that we've received so far. Those are objections for individual water rights, not like one objection might include several water rights. But the thing to note is there are several objections that, or several water rights that may have more than one objection. And there you can look at the numbers broken down a little bit, where we've, as of last night, 24 hours ago, we had 11 that were filed in the White River Basin. We've responded to about 37 of those and those objections. And right now, we obviously have quite a task in front of us to respond to all the objections. But the goal is, and it's not even a goal, we have to, there's nothing in the statute that says this, but we really need to get through all of those objections preferably by the end of November, early December. And the reason for that is then we need to prepare our final list that will be submitted with the water court by December 31st. As for the pre-compact alternate points, I think that number that was on the other slide was 190 something, 196 pre-compact alternate points. Of those 196, the majority of them belong to just two owners, two entities that own those. And what had happened is they went through the court process and got a decree to lots of various wells and sites that actually the wells and ditches and pumps or ponds or whatever they were had never been built. And so that was the reasoning for putting those on the abandonment list, because these were structures that had never been built, but they had made alternate points of diversions at these structures with absolute water rights. However, in working with the River District and the state engineer, Director Ryan, it has been decided what the process I've gone through over the last 8-10 months here is to reach out to those two major owners and just ask them whether or not they want me to remove those alternate points carte blanche, or if they want to take a look at what their water rights portfolio and determine for themselves whether or not to keep them on the list or not. For the other ones, if I am not reaching out to the individuals, they're just going to simply come off the list. And I have reached out to a few of the other smaller owners, but for the most part, if I don't have an opportunity to reach out to the owners of those pre-compact alternate points, they will simply come off the list. So the last thing I want to touch base on as far as these water rights goes is I did do an additional review of these water rights. I've gone through my list again to really evaluate whether or not some of them warranted coming off. And you saw that in the North Platte River Basin, the number had gone down by quite a bit. It went down to 95 from 143, I think it was. And that was why I've gone through this additional review process and removed 48. Here in the Yampa White Green, again, this was 24 hours ago, I had removed 23, but I finished my review of those rights and there will be 31 additional rights removed. And this does not account for the fact that from those 37 objections that we've received, some additional water rights were removed even. So even more than that 31 that I just mentioned has been removed. So with that, let me just touch base on river calls. And I also, before leaving my presentation, want to actually toss a couple links into the chat because as I was sitting here thinking as we were going through these prior presentations, I thought, man, it would be really nice if I had put a few other pieces of information in here. And I thought, well, there's always the chat. So I'll get those in there too before I end my presentation. But moving through river calls, I'm going to tell you, I wasn't real happy with the way these screenshots worked in my presentation, so a little blurry. But if you're interested in what kind of calls we have in Division 6 or even in the White River, this is where you want to go. You want to go to dwr.colorado.gov. And then you want to click on Water Administration, where you can see my little red arrow. And then once you get to Water Administration, you can see over there on the right, you can see where it says Active Calls, and you go ahead and hit Active Calls. And then you go to a screen where you see a lot of our information from the Colorado Decision Support System. This is a real common screen that any of you might see, whether you're going to look at stream flows or anything like that. Which if anybody that hasn't used our Streamflow website, it's a one-stop shopping for all gauges, especially in Division 6. It's a wonderful place to go, and it includes USGS gauges and the gauges we operate. So it would look very similar to this. But anyway, focusing on the calls, you want to go to that drop-down menu where you see the arrow, and I've dropped it down and selected Division 6, and here you can see all the calls. Again, since I printed this out and put this on here yesterday, we have had a couple more calls entered on here, but and this actually doesn't scroll to another page right now. But if you went in there right now, you'd see that there's a couple more that you'd have to scroll down to. The ones I've pointed out here with the red arrows are the Piceance Creek calls. Those are the only calls we have in the White River Basin right now. We always have a split call, very, very common to have a split call because the Piceance Creek does go dry up higher in the basin. So we have an upper basin call, and then we have, or upper, stream flow call, and then this lower basin call. So that's why you see two different entries there in Piceance Creek, and they are two separate calls administered completely separately. And this last column, I just thought this last slide I had to put in here because this rarely happens and it may never happen again. This is actually the South Platte River. And you can see that because as Dr. Bollinger indicated, they're looking pretty nice over there as far as moisture on the east slope, and they have less calls than we do right now. So it's kind of amazing and a rarity. So with that, let me, that's my last slide. Let me put in here in the chat here as I'm done, maybe just as I'm finishing up, 2 links. And let me just tell you what these links are. One of them is to our Division 6 website. A lot of good information on our Division 6 website, especially like our functional standards on measuring devices. And then we also have a new link for different forms for diversion record submittal. And so the second link, because I'm talking about diversion records and diversion record submittal, we also now have a user guide for how to submit diversion records. So that'll be the second link, just so you can have an easy link to the PDF to that. So I do want to thank everybody in the White River Basin for providing records last year. As you know, we still have 1 water commissioner in the White River Basin, and everyone's help in providing diversion records is so critical. And we really, Shannon Lewis, the water commissioner, and myself greatly appreciate everybody coming forth and providing those records to us. And I encourage you to continue to do so. Okay, Zane, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Thanks, Erin. Really appreciate that. And thanks for that additional information as well. I'm going to introduce our next speaker now. Callie Hendrickson, who many of you know in the White River Basin, has been the executive director of the Meeker-based White River and Douglas Creek Conservation Districts in Rio Blanco County since 2010. Callie has spent her life in service to agriculture, and in March, Callie and her sister were presented with the Trailblazers Award for 2021 from the Denver Business Journal. The Trailblazers Award is part of the journal's Who's Who in Agriculture in Colorado. And so pleased to see you on that list, Callie, and pleased to see you here this evening. Looking forward to your presentation. I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Zane, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about our integrated water initiative here in the White River. And okay, we are good to go with our PowerPoint here. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about who is involved in this effort, as well as what it really is. We have our mission and goals developed, and then what our current status of the project is, and how you, if you would like, how you could get involved. So we'll just do a quick rundown of all of this. So the White River and Douglas Creek Conservation District boards offered to take the lead on this effort back in 2019. There had been a lot of conversation about it for a while before then. One of the reasons we kind of held off on that is because we have the algae study going, which you're going to hear a little bit more about that in the near future here. And so we kind of held off for a little bit, but we got underway basically in early 2020, I guess I should say 19 and 20. And the district helped put together what we're calling the Planning Advisory Committee, or we refer to it as the PAC. It's a very diverse group that is made up of agriculture, recreation, environmental, municipal, industrial, and government entities. And we have about 16 representatives on that. We really do feel like we have about a third and a third from the ag, and then environmental and recreation is another third, and then our local governments as the last third. So the other piece of it is we are very, very committed to this being a citizen-driven effort here from the local community. So I'll talk a little bit about how we've gotten here. I'm going to hold that a little bit to the end, but I want to talk about our goals and so forth first. So if you can see down there at the bottom of the page, please do feel free to visit the district's website, which is whiterivercd.com. And if you click on the initiative, the White River Initiative tab, it has all of our notes, all of the presentations, and any documents that have been developed so far. And we also keep the meetings that are coming up and so forth. When those are identified, we get those on there as well. So always a good source of information. So the mission statement that has been developed is that this is a community-based initiative to identify actions promoting a healthy river that ensures a vibrant agriculture community and maintains healthy fisheries while protecting water rights, quantity and quality with respect for local customs, cultures, and property rights. So as you can tell, that's a mouthful and it's a big undertaking, and we're excited to be moving forward. So our goals on this are to, first and foremost, protect and preserve existing water rights and other beneficial water uses. We want to protect and enhance the water quantity and quality through promoting the best management practices. And that we'll do that for forest, riparian, and rangeland health, as well as the favorable conditions of stream flow. So the third goal is to identify opportunities for creation or improvement of infrastructure to support efficient, consumptive, and non-consumptive uses. And the final one is to support the development and maintenance of efficient and necessary long-term storage solutions that will improve, enhance, and ensure irrigation, river health, water quantity, water quality, and native and recreational fisheries. So through our first phase of the process, we have broken the White River and the Piance Creek into our 4 different segments. You'll notice the upper reach here is everything that's above the Miller ditch diversion. And so from there up is our upper reach. We really felt like that was a natural break. And then between those 2 red lines is where you see the majority of the irrigation. So it's really where the big diversions come out. And then it's down the lower end of it is on the west end of Powell Park, which is what we're thinking the majority of the return flows come back in by then as well. So really a nice defined section in there that is highly irrigated within that area. And of course, everything from there down, we're referencing as the lower reach. And then Piance Creek itself will be a standalone as well. So I mentioned those because when our PAC has subcommittees now that are going to be taking those overall goals that I mentioned a little bit ago, they're going to be refining and identifying the objectives that they want to accomplish within each one of those segments. And we'll put all of that together in our final plan and scope of work for the next phase of our effort here. So our current status. So looking back just a little bit over the last couple of years, we have interviewed 30 people. We have held 4 stakeholder input sessions, and then the document that was developed to capture all of that information was provided on our website for about 30 days to provide public input. We got some additional input there. And then the PAC took that information and developed the mission statement and those goals. So this wasn't just 16 people sitting down and deciding what they wanted. This was accumulation of everything that everybody had included, the input that we had received, and then pulled it all into those goals. We are currently in the second phase of the process where we will again develop those reach goals and the objectives for each one of them. We have recently hired a couple of coordinators, and I'm very excited to have them on board. I think we'll be making much faster progress now. And one of them is Liz Chandler. She is the PAC coordinator, which will be working or is working with the PAC themselves, coordinating those meetings and most of the reach meetings and so forth. That way she will be doing the final report and the phase 3 scope of work. Carrie Brennan is our project coordinator, and I referenced that projects. We've got a couple here that I will cover in just a moment, the diversion structure and the riparian assessments. I will say both of these ladies have done an excellent job of just kind of taking the bull by the horn and running with it. They've just been on board, I guess, about 6 weeks, and so thrilled to have them there. And we plan to have this effort complete, this phase completed in October of 22. So our diversion structure assessments, you will notice that there is a lot of effort to keep, I'll keep referencing the local and the people that are involved, rather than hiring contractors and so forth that would come from other communities in and help us coordinate and do the research on these. We're working really hard to keep utilize our local expertise. And one of the reasons for that is we all know that when someone comes from the outside, yes, they put together a nice report. And sometimes that report is not visited quite as frequently as it should be. And we really feel strongly that we want to have people in the community that we can go to that has this firsthand knowledge of the research and information that they've collected. And so with this local team for the diversion structure, you'll note that we have irrigators themselves here. So Chris Collins and Forrest Nelson are on the PAC, and they're part of this team. And then each one of the water right holders will also be there and be a part of the evaluation team, because of course they bring a lot of great information with them. Kendra Young is with the NRCS and the Conservation District. She's a joint staff person there, and she's been helping to lead this effort. We have CPW, David Graff and Bailey Franklin have been involved in this, as well as Ian Wilson with Trout Unlimited. And my apologies if I have overlooked someone. I feel like I may have there, but that is the majority of our team, at least. They have already completed 3 assessments, so they're kind of getting in a rhythm, I guess you would say, and getting the details worked out, and pretty excited about the information that's coming out of those. Then we are doing riparian health assessments, and we're using the proper functioning condition assessment for this. We're very fortunate to have Dr. Mario Sullivan from the Northwest Community College, who is leading this effort. CSU Extension agent Linda Masters is helping as well. Linda comes with a great water background and range as well. Bureau of Land Management has really stepped up to help us with bringing in a team to train the proper functioning condition assessment process. And John Kaminsky is helping us with that tremendously. So that training is going to happen in July for the team. And then later on in the year, after the team has done a few of the assessments and so forth, they're really going to try to pull together an opportunity to have a workshop and train and show other people what they are looking at, why they're looking at it, and the benefits of it. We'll also include landowners in that. Again, very important to keep our landowners involved, with CPW David Graff and River's Edge West John Leary rounding out that team as well. So my final slide here, I believe, is just how can you get involved? Assuming most everyone on the call is from here in the White River, we would love to have your involvement. Again, many of you that were interviewed and part of those meetings early are probably wondering, where are we at and when are we going to be doing something again? We told you from the beginning, it'll be a long, slow process, but we feel like we're getting some really good information pulled together. So please visit the district's website at thewhiterivercd.com. We can always keep you updated there. The district has a Conservation Corner article every other week in the newspaper. And so if anything significant's happening there, you will see notices there. And then you can always contact the district office at whiterivercd@gmail.com, or the phone number there with Tristan has always a wealth of knowledge, and then she can connect you with our coordinators, whichever one it is that you might need, depending on what your questions would be. Whoops, that's someone to go. So I think that's my last slide, and I don't want to go no more. So
Great.
Here you go, Zane. I hope that
Awesome.
covered everything you needed.
That was perfect. Thank you so much, Callie. We always appreciate you having a presence at these State of the River meetings, and always appreciate getting to work with you in the field up in northwestern Colorado. So
Thank you. You too.
Our next guest is Natalie Day with the USGS, US Geological Survey. Natalie is a cross-disciplinary biologist focusing on the Colorado Plateau and working to provide information to land managers, policymakers, and the public writ large. Some of her main research interests include assessing the effects of land disturbance in dry lands on regional hydrology, understanding controls on riverine and reservoir algae blooms, and establishing effective ways to restore degraded dry lands. Natalie is going to talk to us tonight about an issue that isn't unique per se to the White River system, but something we've all been working on in some way, shape, or form, and hoping to find a solution to for quite some time now. She's going to talk to us about the White River algae study. And with that, I will pass the torch to Natalie and look forward to seeing your presentation.
All right, thank you. So I have given many talks about this study, and as most of you know, we collected a lot of information, a lot of data, and given that I have 10 minutes, I'm going to focus on one small chunk of the data. Today I'm going to focus on nutrients. So, okay, when I talk about nutrients in this context, I'm referring to nitrogen and phosphorus. So one of the first things that we are doing in our study is to look at nutrient concentrations in the river, because if concentrations are too high, this can promote algal growth. FYI, I'm terrible at saying algae and algal correctly, so it's okay. Okay, so in the graph on the right, we see that as concentrations increase, they may not have an effect on algal growth, or we measure it as chlorophyll A. But once you reach a certain threshold concentration, you can start to see an increase in algal growth. And so these threshold concentrations they can be national level thresholds, they can be state level. The state of Colorado does not have a threshold concentration for nitrogen or phosphorus specific to algal blooms. I suspect this will change in the future, considering that this is not a problem unique to the White River. There are some thresholds, the CDPHE regulation 31 and 85 are meant to protect many types of water uses like water supply, agriculture, and recreation, though it's probably way too high to limit benthic algal blooms. And so in this presentation and in our study, we're using other thresholds, and specifically one developed by the Montana Department of Water Quality. And if you're interested in learning how they came up with this threshold value, or are interested in algal blooms happening in rivers very similar to the White River in Montana, you can check out the link below. Now, in addition to considering threshold concentrations, we also need to consider nutrient limitation, or the amount of one type of nutrient to another. So many of you are into agriculture and apply fertilizer to your field, and you'll know that you can apply a certain ratio of nitrogen to phosphorus to make different things happen, to promote flowers, promote root growth. And so this also applies to algae in rivers. So for this study, we took advantage of the 4 long-term monitoring sites that are located in the White River. These are shown as red dots on this map. And we looked at 20 years of data from these locations. The power of long-term data means that we can ask questions like, when are concentrations the highest in the river over the course of a year? And what does this tell us about major inputs of nutrients into the river? We can also ask questions about how concentrations have changed over time. Have conditions become more favorable in recent years? And are these changes occurring everywhere or just at one or more sites throughout the basin? In addition to looking at data from these 4 long-term monitoring sites, we also collected more information from an additional 16 sites. So 20 sites total, and these sites spanned the river from the town of Meeker all the way up to Trappers Lake in the campground on the South Fork. And so this allows us to better represent spatial variability in nutrient concentrations across the river and further identify sources of nutrients. So looking at the long-term data, I'm going to here focus on the seasonality of nutrient concentrations. So this is 20 years of data from 4 sites represented by the 4 box plots on each month. And there are different kinds of nitrogen and phosphorus. So inorganic nitrogen, total nitrogen, orthophosphate, and total phosphorus. And here we see that concentrations of most of the forms are highest during spring runoff. So in May and June. So this tells us that that spring runoff period is really important for delivering nutrients to the system. It's a time when overland flow and higher stream flows flush sediment and nutrients that have accumulated in the terrestrial world into the river. And orthophosphate, which is the most bioavailable or desirable form of phosphorus for living organisms, doesn't show that peak in spring. So this indicates that there's maybe a different source of orthophosphate in the system, or that it's so desirable by algae. As soon as it becomes available, it's immediately consumed. And so we may not even see fluctuations in concentrations. This next slide shows nutrient concentrations collected from the 20 sites that I mentioned earlier. And this is organized in a similar way where there's the different types of nutrients, and then upstream on the North Fork to downstream, the South Fork River is in the middle, and the confluence and the main stem. So it's upstream to downstream. And again, we collected samples during spring, which are represented by the blue symbols, and during summer, which is represented by the orange symbols. And so there's many pages in the report I'm writing about this graph in particular, but today I want to just focus on comparing the summer values to those algal thresholds. So we use summer values because that is when algae is growing, and so we want to compare nutrient concentrations, what's available in the river, to thresholds known to promote algae growth. And so for the total nitrogen, the thresholds are for total nitrogen and total phosphorus. And so for total nitrogen, you can see that concentrations in the summer in both 2019 and 2020, which are represented by the different types of symbols, nitrogen is below the threshold value, except when we get down to these furthest downstream sites. Total phosphorus concentrations, on the other hand, are closer to the threshold, starting all the way up in the North Fork. And they exceed the threshold in the lower on the main stem, and especially at these lower downstream sites. And then we can also look at nitrogen limitation, or the ratio of nitrogen to phosphorus. So here, the lower line represents nitrogen limiting conditions. And so it's not surprising that in areas where there's higher phosphorus concentrations, we see nitrogen limiting ratios. And then on the South Fork, there tends to be higher nitrogen than on the North Fork. And so we see that concentration or ratios are actually indicate phosphorus limiting conditions. And again, just limitation can be kind of confusing, but essentially, in a basic sense, it means that there could be all the phosphorus in the world in the system, but if there's not enough nitrogen, then algae growth won't happen. And further on the main stem, we see more variable ratios. So sometimes they're nitrogen limiting, sometimes they're phosphorus limited, and sometimes they're co-limited, meaning that addition of either nitrogen or phosphorus could stimulate algal growth. And the last thing I want to talk about is a synoptic sampling that we did in October of 2020. So a synoptic is a fancy word for saying that we went out and collected nutrient concentration, water quality samples, and stream flow at all 20 sites in the same day. So this required a crew of 10 people coming up. And we did this on the same day because we want to capture the state of the river at the same time at all locations. And from this information, stream flow and concentration, we can calculate loads of nutrients and yields of nutrients, which is a way to normalize for the effects of drainage area. So on the previous slide, you can see at the top, I've grouped all of our sites into different subbasins based on major tributaries like Marvine Creek and Miller Creek separate some of these basins. And so I'm able to group together the results from all of the 20 sites. And so looking at yields is cool because it allows you to identify areas of land that have higher yields of nutrients. And so it can be useful for land managers for identifying locations. Like if we decided that phosphorus is the problem, then you could look at what specific subbasin is contributing the highest yields of that nutrient. And it doesn't have to just be for algae, it could be useful for other factors as well. And so what we see from these yields is that total nitrogen yields are pretty consistent. This is the sum of the North Fork and South Fork, so it's normal that it's higher, but it's pretty consistent among basins until you get to that lower basin, that lower reach of the main stem. We do not see an increase in inorganic nitrogen at the same time. So total nitrogen is inorganic nitrogen plus organic nitrogen plus ammonia. So this increase here means that there is a higher yield of organic nitrogen or ammonia occurring in this reach. And we see that for total phosphorus, yields are, again, fairly consistent among the subbasins, but the highest yield occurs in the lower North Fork. And so to refresh your memory of what's happening there, that is this area right here below Marvine Creek to the confluence. And so these are findings that we explore in much greater detail in the report. And this study will have 2 reports coming out. One is about stream flow and nutrients. So it touches on what Becky talked about earlier, the low stream flows, and then also how those may affect what's happening with nutrients over time. And then our second SIR will focus on linking factors to algae. And we'll also make a fact sheet, which is like 1 or 2 pages of all of this confusing stuff summarized in a more digestible way. And then all of our data is publicly released. And we expect this to be done by spring of 2021.
All right. Thank you, Natalie. That was excellent. And yeah, good job packing so much complicated information into an easy to understand, but still complicated and complex issue. So we really appreciate your work on this issue.
Thanks.
Thanks. Next up, I'm going to introduce Alden Vanderbrink, who may not need much of an introduction to most of us here, and especially those folks working in water in Rio Blanco County and on the White River, more broadly speaking. Alden is the district manager for the Rio Blanco Water Conservancy District. He's represented Rio Blanco County on the Colorado River District's board of directors since I believe January of 2015. He also serves on the serves as the Water Conservancy District's representative to the Yampa White Green Basin Roundtable in northwestern Colorado. Thanks for being with us, Eldon. Look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. And I'm glad to see we've got a good group of participants, many of whom have worked quite a bit on these projects and are very understanding of the processes that are going on in our White River, and let alone the project that I'm going to be talking more about with you all. I know I wished I could have a little bit more time, but unfortunately 10 minutes is it, and that's fine. So I'll make it work. But we do have a couple other projects here. We're working on a rural water system for water users outside of the town of Rangeley, and that's in the process of developing. But also we continue to work with Kenny Reservoir and Taylor Draw Dam to try to elongate the life of that reservoir, since we are seeing a demise in its size. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But with the preliminary information that we've kind of shared tonight, I wish everybody had some great news. We do have some great news. We've got a lot of planning efforts here, and then these efforts are actually being implemented right now, which is good to see. And that's where I'm proud to be affiliated with these folks. And this is another, what we're going to discuss here is another one of those planning efforts on the White River. And that revolves around a project many of you are well aware of, and that's the Wolf Creek Reservoir. And I'm going to kind of just dive into it. And some of this, I'm going to try to keep us on schedule as much as I can. So I'm going to kind of go with, 75% of Kenny Reservoir has been lost to siltation. It started out at 13,800 acre feet, and we're down to about 3,200 acre feet of storage left. That makes water storage for the town of Rangeley a unique predicament. And it limits their water storage because we have great limitations upon Kenny Reservoir, which is a federally regulated project. But also with that water storage, we see with that loss at Kenny Reservoir, we see a loss in our recreation at Kenny Reservoir. And we're looking at about 10 years, less than 10 years. On the average, this year being a low flow, we lose about 310 acre feet of storage due to siltation. But when you get those high runoff years like we have in 2010, that makes off for the lows. So in my eyes, that's the only real benefit that we get from a drought is we see smaller amounts of siltation or in Kenny Reservoir. It helps us elongate the life, but it does make life very challenging here in the White River system. So as we move along, we noticed that within the White River, we've identified as well that future water development is really a challenge because we've pretty well maximized the use of the White River. There's not a lot of areas that we can conserve more without digging into our alluvial storage. And as most of you know, the White River runs from the groundwater up and from direct flow and from runoff, but also from flood irrigation. You notice that map that was presented earlier from Meeker. I got another map here I'll show a little bit. But there's really a large amount of return flows that comes from that Meeker Dome where all that flood irrigation, and that's really a large water supply. It's an aquifer that we've been using since the late 1800s, and it's worked very well. But we're at a point in time here to where that system is just not enough to keep us going by. So it makes with that challenge that we've got in the White River, we've also got threatened and endangered species, and that's something else. So not only do we have a lack of water supply, we've also got to help our friendly fish that we have living in our river system here. So we've also identified that we've got agricultural water users. Deficit irrigation is something that's very common, and it got to be a norm for folks to where they didn't even realize that it was actually happening. And that was real. So these folks have been working for decades on trying to apply a full water right to their property, but yet they have not been able to fully develop that water or apply that water right to their property. So that's been a real eye opener as I've learned that. And as you've seen earlier, drought conditions aren't getting better. I know I seen a comment earlier about climate, and in the White River system, Rio Blanco County, along with Montrose County, tied in North America for the highest temperature increase at 2.6 degrees centigrade. And that's the highest in the nation, Rio Blanco County and Montrose County. And I can't say that's something that I want to be proud of, but it's a reality. So we're learning how to deal with it. And that's where this water plan that the Rio Blanco Water Conservancy District has developed, along with a lot of input through folks throughout our White River Basin, have developed. Then as a final piece here, as we identified, there was a Colorado Compact risk analysis that was done. And within the White River, we're looking at 20% of the water rights within the White River Basin that have the potential to be sequestered underneath and shut off during a potential compact call. But more specifically, and more importantly, within the Rio Blanco Water Conservancy District, we've got 45% of our water users within our district that are susceptible to a compact call. And that's simply because we're a junior basin. And we're just younger. The Yampa River is very similar, but this is a very astronomical number. And that 45% includes a lot of our industry, most of our municipalities, and agriculture as well. So we've got a lot at stake when we're looking at that 20 and 45% within the White River Basin. So, and within the White River Basin, we've got 3 storage buckets. And right now, I know today there was a decree that came out to do a release from Lake Avery. But Lake Avery is pretty small as it is, and it's tasked, but you've got the storage of 7,600 there, Rio Blanco Lake at 1,000. And right now, Rio Blanco Lake, I think, is probably down to about 800 acre feet of storage, just due to the drought going on here, and water usage. And then you got Kenny Reservoir. Remember, we started out at 13,800 acre feet, but we're down to about 3,400. And really within those 3 buckets, you've got one reservoir, Kenny Reservoir, that actually has water rights that can be used for other beneficial uses than recreation. Rio Blanco and Lake Avery are pretty much for recreation. There is water that is released from Avery under special conditions like they're doing now, and that's to help the fish and the recreational environment up there and above meager for temperature and dissolved oxygen. And within Kenny Reservoir, I'll get to that, but it's a run-of-the-river reservoir. Now, I want to also kind of point out the agriculture is here. As we talked about, we've got a lot of water users that on the White River that have been using deficit irrigation, but we've got a map here from 2017 of 28,624 acres of ag land in production in Rio Blanco County. I think the 2019 SWASI technical update had 28,000. So, but this was a USDA. I've used some USDA numbers, and this here is from the White River Management Plan Programmatic Biological Opinion. So we've got 28,000. But as we move along, we're going to flip and we're going to see here, whoops, excuse me, in the red area, those are ag lands that are considered of high value soils by USDA standards. So in Rio Blanco County, we're only using about 31% of our ag lands. And of that, a lot of these lands, there is water rights already attached to it. It's just these landowners can't put this land into production or beneficial use because the water is simply not available. So we've got within Rio Blanco County, 90,800 acres, and we've got 28,000 that's really being used. We've got quite a ways to develop here, and that goes back to our junior nature that we have within our White River Basin and the need for storage. And if there was more storage, we'd be able to get more of that water to put to beneficial use. So what is the water district done here to address the crisis? Excuse me. We've developed a solution to the pending water crisis in the White River. And we've also identified 2 very economical storage locations. And we've identified as well of those 2 locations, one primary alternative the board of directors have. We've also identified a means to minimize adverse environmental consequences. And we've also identified a means to impact private landowners. That was a primary concern to our board of directors, to minimize landowners, because we have such little land within the White River Basin that is considered high value. And why do we want to take that land out of production? We'd be better off keeping that land in production and complement our land here with available water resources so we can put that valuable agricultural land into production and use these water rights as they are so decreed. We've obtained a storage decree, and I'll share more of that here in a little bit. We've also got a project that has the ability to provide environmental enhancements. We've identified a mechanism to provide recreation and economic benefits to Northwest Colorado. And the project also supports and promotes White River and Rio Blanco County bait agriculture. And we've also entered into governmental agreements with Rio Blanco County, the town of Rangeley, and our Water Conservancy District to the east of us, Yellow Jacket Water Conservancy District. So the solution that the Rio Blanco Water Conservancy District Board of Directors came up with was a new storage project within the White River Basin. In 2018, the board unanimously voted for the Wolf Creek off channel of the White River with a pump station. If you'll notice down to the right, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but the dark blue is the preferred alternative. The full area with the light blue and the very gray blue down in there, that is would be the off channel or the on channel reservoir. But regardless, water flows back up into Wolf Creek Reservoir because it's a natural depression back up in there. Beneficial uses for the project are highly multi-purpose. We've got municipal, which is so huge to the town of Rangeley because they don't have any water storage. Augmentation, the junior nature of the White River, that really helps us open up being able to use water for agriculture and other purposes in our basin. Mitigation of environmental impacts, and that includes endangered fish recovery. Hydropower generation, we already have one. We have operated 2 megawatt hydropower here that provides great beneficial power supply to our community, but also we have in reservoir recreation, piscatorial, and wildlife habitat. What we've identified as well is that no action is not an option. And some of these I'm going to reiterate, folks, but it's a reality. And I wish we were in a better situation. But the White River doesn't have any storage to meet the current drought needs or reliably provide water for the future. Kenny Reservoir is a run-of-the-river project with primary purposes being flood control. We used to have massive ice jams where they even bring in the Air Force with their jets and literally blow up ice on the White River. Amazing. Guys crawling out there with dynamite. But the other process or purpose of Kenny Reservoir is hydropower and recreation. We've already mentioned Lake Avery and Rio Blanco having limited water uses. The White River constituents are also currently facing an imminent municipal, agricultural, environmental, and economic catastrophe due to the lack of storage for a resilient water supply. I can't imagine what would happen to the community here within the White River Basin should a compact call happen, or should the White River not have water to supply its needs. I don't know what would happen. And we rely upon return flows and flood irrigation to supply our needs. It's very hard to do additional conservation and keep water in the river because all that does is delay the impacts of the inevitable by the loss of those return flows. So these folks within the White River have been great stewards of how they maintain their White River system. But they're at a point now to where they need to do something extra. And after 140 years of their management plan, it's pretty obvious that we're here, especially with the ongoing climate issues. Recreational benefits in Kenny Reservoir, it's going to keep going away. Right now, we get 10, 12 boats out there, and that reservoir is full. And we're already seeing recreation conflicts with people competing for space. Go by that parking lot on a weekend, it's packed. Tax revenue from the project will not be available to benefit the local economy, especially in an economy that's extremely tasked due to the loss of severance tax, but also to the sequestration of extraction resources. White River Basin agriculture will continue to be sequestered along with present and future. And then you'll see the benefits. The list is fairly substantial. And some of those include, for the threatened endangered species, economic development, augmentation supply, which is so critical to us here, and water storage to develop for the future. But then it also ushers in a new means to implement new water conservation into our White River Basin. Large list of substantial local support for the community for the project. And that's been in financial letters of support, actual public speaking, offering time from staff and legal services. And then we've got a work plan that we're progressing on. We're wrapping up with a lot of that here. I'm not going to go into each piece, but we do have a work plan that we're working through a grant that was awarded to us in 2018 by the Colorado Water Conservation Board. And then as we go, I know the folks want me to keep pressing that this is our community. And we have made a commitment to our water users and those that we represent to progress solutions for the White River community and to take care of their needs, including agriculture, environmental, and drinking water supplies, while collaboratively working with our constituents and partners. So with that, thank you.
Thank you, Eldon. Really appreciate that update and overview. It's an important project to keep an eye on. Certainly something that we're watching closely and glad to be able to assist where we have been able to. So thank you again, Eldon. Really appreciate that overview. Our next presenter, and I do recognize we're right at almost 7:30 now. Program was scheduled to go from 6 to 7:30. Looks like we're holding on to most of our participants out there. So I do understand that people have families and dinner and all of that stuff. Those panelists that can stick around for a brief Q&A, if we have questions that need to be answered, we'd ask you to stick around, but also understand if some of you on the panel or some of you that have presented tonight need to get on to other business. But now I'm going to introduce Jojo Law. And after Jojo presents, we'll jump into a Q&A to the extent that we have time for that. But Jojo is really glad to have her here this evening. She's an endangered species policy specialist for the CWCB, Colorado Water Conservation Board. Jojo manages CWCB's participation in the Endangered Species Act recovery programs that are absolutely critical to water development and water projects on the Western Slope. She serves as CWCB's representative to the Platte River Recovery Implementation Program as well, and the Upper Colorado River Endangered Fish Recovery Program. So glad to have Jojo here tonight. Looking forward to your presentation and your updates, Jojo. Thank you.
Thank you, Zane, and good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for having me tonight. It's such a privilege to be here to talk about such an important project for the basin, and I will say, I'll promise you this will be a very interesting presentation. So the White River Basin is actually the last basin in Colorado that does not have a programmatic biological opinion for the endangered fish. We have programmatic biological opinions in Colorado, the Gunnison and the Yampa River basins. And for each one of those basins, those PBOs provide Endangered Species Act compliance for the endangered fish for existing water projects. And then we've also set aside water that can be depleted for future projects. And so now stakeholders are endeavoring to do this process for the White River Basin too. And so what does this exactly mean for the basin and for water users? If you have an existing water project that has not gone through the permitting process, and if one day you say you snag a federal nexus, you will need to comply with the Endangered Species Act. And so a programmatic biological opinion for the basin will cover your existing project and will also provide a streamlined Section 7 consultation process for you. So what does this mean? So for example, if I have an existing water project in the basin and I need to do, say, a replacement of infrastructure or do maintenance on my infrastructure, and say I have a federal nexus because I use a federal grant, I will then need to comply with the Endangered Species Act. So I can then use the recovery program's biological opinion instead of getting my own biological opinion. And instead of me replacing and mitigating for my depletions, the program will likely mitigate and do those actions for you. So the program, the programmatic biological opinion will cover some portion of future depletions. And we are setting aside that future amount of water for agriculture, municipal and industrial, oil and gas, and energy uses. Those will all be covered. So if you're planning a new water project in the basin, your depletions will likely be covered by the recovery program and programmatic biological opinion if it's eligible, and we will mitigate those depletions for you. And so this approach has worked very successfully for the entire state. there has not been any project since 1988 that has not been able to proceed because of impacts of their depletions on the endangered fish. And this has resulted in over 1,200 projects in Colorado that receive Endangered Species Act compliance through the program. This represents over 2 million acre feet of water being depleted on an annual basis. So we believe that this helps the White River prepare for its future water projects and protect its existing projects. And I just want to make very clear that the White River Management Plan and Programmatic Biological Opinion in no way limits water rights or future development of projects in the basin. It's simply a tool available for folks in the basin if they like to use it. And if you would like to use the Programmatic Biological Opinion in your environmental permitting and your project is eligible, it's available for all water users. So the other thing that I'd like to say is that the White River Management Plan and PBO has also been identified as a Tier 1 IPP project in the Yampa White Green Roundtable Basin Implementation Plan update. And this programmatic approach to recovery has worked for recovering the endangered fish. I'm so happy to report that there has been 2 recommended downlisting of the fish from the endangered to threatened status. So that's one step closer to delisting these fish and taking them off of the endangered species list. So in 2018, the Fish and Wildlife Service recommended downlisting the humpback chub, and a final rule is expected in any month now in 2021. And again in 2018, after the humpback was recommended to be downlisted, the razorback sucker was also recommended to be downlisted. So that proposed rule is also anticipated this year. So I actually did not know that the title of my presentation tonight was Fish Tales until I saw the advertisement go out. So I did feel a little bit of slight pressure to tell you all some good fish stories. And so since I am the last presentation to go tonight and you guys have hung on later tonight, I thought I would share some stories with you. So I would first like to start with some historical stories of the endangered fish from the early 1910s to the 1930s. This information is from an effort that the recovery program did a while back to collect data from folks who were around back in the day in the 1900s. These stories are from 111 seniors with an average age of 77 years old. The oldest person interviewed was born in 1895, and the youngest was born in 1947. So this photo is from circa 1910 of Mr. Gene Bittler, who is a Mayville resident, and he recounts catching a Colorado pike minnow. He says, "I pitched that green frog out there and this white fish hit it, just about straight across. And he ran down that fast water, riffles, and took out about 200 feet of line before I turned him around. It was one of the most thrilling fish I ever caught, if you want to know the truth. When it comes to matching endangered Colorado River fish's sporting qualities against other freshwater game fish, the Colorado pike minnow ranks with the best of them." These 111 seniors also told us how to catch a Colorado pike minnow back in the day when they were abundant. They say conventional rods and reels often were used by anglers to catch the fish. However, set lines, which are baited lines left in the water overnight, were the most common equipment used. Tim Merchant, a deputy sheriff with Sweetwater County, said that his grandfather used to use set lines to catch Colorado pike minnow in the Green River, where the Flaming Gorge Reservoir is currently. He said, "They called it Linwood. It's underwater now, and we'd picnic down there, spend the day. And my grandfather would get chicken parts, just great big old chunk of chicken parts and stuff like that. Put it on a hook and throw it out in the river into these big holes down there with clothesline. He just tied clothesline on it onto the bumper of the truck. And when that went tight, they just back up the truck and drag those fish on the bank. I can remember twice, 2 separate occasions, dragging those pike minnow out with the truck. They was as big as a junior high school kid, 90 pounds. That's a big fish." And retired Utah game warden Steve Randusevic from Browns Park, Utah said, "Well, I know when the dam was built up here around what they call the outlet there, the bypass, me and one of the fisher boys out of Utah, we were catching pike minnow up there. We used lures. They eat about just anything you throw in there. I don't know if they was either awful mad about something or awful hungry about something, but you go on every trip and just get tired of pulling them in. We'd have maybe 20 or 30 fish out on the bank, and when the workers would shut down with their shift was over, they'd come back and pick up the fish and take them home. And further testimony of the Colorado pike minnow's aggressiveness and sporting character is described by the bait that they would take. So to catch a Colorado pike minnow, anglers reported using frogs, mice, liver, chicken parts, grub worms, earthworms, sculpin, and parts of fish, including other endangered fish like razorback sucker, bony-tailed chubs, and carp. Catherine Rinker from Lily Park, Colorado said that back in the 1920s and 30s, the best bait you can get from them was if you could find a mice nest and get these little mice when they was pink and put them on a little board or something so that they can float. And then you float that board out there. You get them out there in the river quite a ways and pull them off that board. They wouldn't hit the water good until one of them fish would take it. So beside mice, historical accounts told us that swallows and cottontail rabbits were also popular and effective bait for Colorado pike minnow. So how big are these fish? From over 100 accounts from seniors, it's kind of hard to tell exactly how big these fish are. But some stories include an enormous Colorado pike minnow in the 5-foot, 80-pound range. Herbert Schneider said in recalling that incident, well, if I remember, there was a lot of suckers and carp, but the thing that stood out in my mind was that big fish. I couldn't figure out how the hell they could get that big fish out of that stream that was no bigger than the river. Of course, the river was bigger back at that time. I was no good at fishing at that time, but I was interested in what kind of fish it was, and I was told it was a minnow, a member of the minnow family, and that's what it was. And hell, minnows are what you put on the end of a hook. That's what stuck in my mind. How the hell one of those little fish got so big? So since that time, by the 1960s, Colorado pike minnow were extirpated from the lower Colorado River Basin due to modified hydrology and habitats. In the upper Colorado River Basin, including Lake Powell, some waters were turned into cold water shell races and hydrology and habitat change. Non-native sports fishes were also introduced into the reservoirs and rivers, and by 1967, the number of Colorado pike minnow were so low that they were listed on the federal endangered species list. And the White River serves as an important tributary for the endangered fish and the Colorado pike minnow and razorback sucker. Surveys have demonstrated that the highest catch rates of Colorado pike minnow are in the lower White River. And the White River on average contributes about 14% of the total annual flow in the lower Green River. And it's estimated right now on average, roughly 10% of the natural flow of the White River is depleted annually by human uses. And today there's only 2 wild populations found in the upper basin upstream of Lake Powell. Thus, the importance of the White River Management Plan and programmatic biological opinion is twofold. 1 is to continue to recover the endangered fish, and 2, to allow for water to be developed in the basin. So for the past couple of years, we have been working to model flows and water depletions to better understand future hydrology. The things that we have accomplished so far are that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has finalized draft recommendations on the draft flow recommendations on the river that are needed for the endangered fish. We have identified mitigation actions. We have mapped out an approach to conduct the management plan in a phased manner to cover the first 10 years, and then later we'll cover until 2050. We've conducted climate change modeling and assessments, and we have tentatively agreed upon a future amount of depletions that will be covered under this programmatic biological opinion. So the next step is to please keep your eyes out and open for the release of the draft White River Management Plan. This will be coming to you and your roundtable and all stakeholders for comments. And I also just wanted to thank Don Anderson, Director Tom Chart, and Aldern Vanderbrink, and the other stakeholders serving on the White River Planning team. I think I saw some of these folks out in the audience, and just want to thank this process couldn't be done without you. Okay, so now let's fast forward to over 100 years later, and I'll end with this final fishtail. And some of you may have seen this photo of Janae Newell taken a couple of years ago on the White River. And I just want to recount her story as a final story. She said, "I baited and cast the line into the White River, hoping to catch a few bass to take home for dinner. First cast, I throw it across and wham, I get a huge hit and keep reeling and there's a giant fish on. It immediately took drag. I was sure it was a big catfish, but my husband said it wasn't. I felt all the fins for spines, which it had none. I looked inside its mouth, which had no teeth, and it was pure white inside. Rather than teeth, it felt as though his mouth was more beak-like with flesh over it. The mouth was large enough to fit a young mallard inside. We tried to estimate the size and knew it was over 4 feet long, and it's heavy. I set it back in the water and enjoyed a little bit more time looking over this gorgeous Colorado pike minnow as it gently swam away. So even after 100 years, folks are still humbled by their catch of these big fish and these Colorado pike minnow, and you know that it'll be a story to remember for their lifetime. So again, I just want to say thank you for your time. My name is JoJo Law, and if you want to learn more about the White River Management Plan or the Programmatic Biological Opinion, please feel free to contact me. And if you liked any of these historical stories, this was a report authored by Fred Corterone for the Recovery Program. And if you're interested, I'll send you a copy of the stories. Thanks for your time.
Jojo, you never cease to amaze me. You are a policy wonk, you're an endangered species expert, and you apparently are an excellent storyteller as well. So thank you for being with us. Thanks for those great stories. We are over time this evening. We do have panelists here, but I think just in the interest, I noticed actually in the Q&A in the chat box, it seems like our panelists have been answering most of the questions that are out there. My team behind the scenes, Alicia Frederick and Eleanor Hassenbeck, this is their last State of the River. Eleanor is moving on to grad school. Alicia is, after a decade or more with the River District, pursuing new opportunities with her partner. I want to thank both of them because none of these events would be possible without them helping us organize and get it done behind the scenes. So I hope you will all join me in giving a virtual round of applause for the staff behind the scenes that make this possible. With that said, I think we've had a great program this evening. Really glad to have been here with you. Wish we could have been here in person. My team is going to put, if they haven't already, all of the emails for presenters and River District staff in the chat box. So if you want to follow up on a question that didn't get answered, or you have ideas or project proposals or anything, feel free to reach out to us or those presenters that helped us put on the State of the River this evening. Again, thank you for your time. What a great program, and loved being with you all, and look forward to doing it in person next time. Thanks again for being here, and we'll see you soon. Bye, everybody.